Volatility in the Turkish lira soared yesterday, the government introducing emergency measures to bolster the currency. I mean, is it just impossible to trade at the moment because you don't know what comes next?
As you say, I mean, with this sort of volatility, it's not only impossible to trade or to hold, it's also very difficult for local retail investors or depositors to know exactly what's going on. And the second thing is obviously, given what we've seen and heard in the last several years, it's also very difficult to analyze properly and to be able to gain a real view of what's going on. So I think these are the things that obviously cause the volatility. And finally, let's face it, Turkey.
Go ahead, Simon.
Let's face it, I mean, Turkey is a capitalist economy, and we all love Turkey. I mean, everybody wants to be visiting Turkey, people want to invest in Turkey. It's not that anyone wants to damage anything in Turkey. And I think that this perception is something that needs to come together, both from the leadership side and in the international investment community side.
Yeah, I mean, if you see, what happened over the last couple of days, the lira literally whipsawed between gains and losses after surging as much as 20% against the US dollar. So what does the lira become from now on? So
let's face it, the lira is the most important currency for Turks who are living in Turkey. And the thing here is that that's the main thing that the leadership needs to take into account. The rest of the world doesn't matter. And also, if you look at real interest rates everywhere else in this world, places like Brazil, Russia, Mexico, oil exporters who have actually a positive basic balance, a current account plus FDI, these guys all have positive forward-looking real interest rates. So the competition from abroad is also high, which means that international capital markets will be looking to push, to put in place investments in those currencies rather than those currencies where you see negative real interest rates. So that's the bottom line. It's very simple. And, the marginal amount needed to move the lira at any stage at the moment is very small, given that we saw that the liquidity just dried up.
But Simon, is this an idiosyncratic problem for Turkey, or actually because they're competing for international capital, it just makes it much harder?
Yes, it makes it that much harder, as you say. You see, I mean, it's not. We've all been faced with this in Turkey in the last several years. So those were the idiosyncrasies. But now, with the Fed tightening monetary policy and others, as I mentioned, having high real interest rates, there's a lot of competition out there. So it's not just a Turkey-related issue. Turkey needs to look at what's going on in the rest of the world now too.
So talk to me a little bit about maybe some of the oil exporting countries. I'm thinking of Russia, Mexico, and Brazil. Is 2022 going to be their year?
That's a very good question. I think for local currency assets in emerging markets, we've seen real big underperformance. And the main reason, as you've mentioned many times, is the stronger dollar. And this is something we're going to be faced with in 2022, a stronger dollar backdrop as we go into the new year, and the Fed tightening, and maybe even tightening anymore, much more as they see inflation picking up. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. The interesting ones are the dollar bonds out there in emerging markets, and we're looking at places like maybe even Turkey or sub-Saharan Africa. So I think there's really quite a mix there, and investors in emerging market assets are really going to distinguish between local currency assets and dollar assets.
Yeah. I mean, we had a pretty interesting turning point in politics in Chile. What does it mean for investors?
I think Chile is an interesting point because the Chilean peso has been actually second to Turkish lira, the underperformer in emerging markets this year. A lot of local politics, a lot of volatility on copper prices. You've had the elections just recently, as you know, with a left-of-center person being elected as president quite strongly. So I think the interesting thing to see LATAM in general in 2022, because it's been a big underperformer if you look at the MB Global Diversified, so the dollar bonds. I think that Chile is an interesting experiment as we go ahead to try to find some midway, if you like, a balance between far right and far left. And this is something that Latin America in general needs.
So when you look in general at some of the emerging markets, is there a part of the world that you like more than others, especially, as you beautifully laid it out, the difference between, local currency assets and hard currency assets?
if we're looking at hard currency assets, I love Africa, and it's particularly sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, there's so much potential there. If we look back in 2021-20, the region received such a small amount of vaccines, and nonetheless, they dealt with it. We've seen this Omicron being discovered in South Africa because they have the sequencing potential to do that. But the one problem that sub-Saharan Africa has is low vaccines. Vaccine rate of about fully vaccinated about 8% of the population. And this has to change. The global community needs to address this, not only for sub-Saharan Africa, but for the rest of the world. Everybody needs to get vaccinated to bring down this pandemic and to sort it out once and for all.
Simon, give me a sense of, we talk a lot about foreign affairs and we talk a lot about the possibility of Russia continuing, if not, scaremongering or even going as far as invading certain parts of Ukraine. What does that mean for emerging market investors in that part of the world?
I think that's a good point, and this is something that EM Invest has been focusing on for many years. And actually, Central and Eastern Europe, whether you look at Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, has been on the minds of everybody for a long time. Geopolitical aspects play a major part here. Let's hope that there is no major escalation now during the Christmas days, the next few weeks, whether it's Christmas in Western Europe or the Christmas celebrations in Eastern Europe. What we need to see is a convergence of politics, as you mentioned, between the European Union and Russia. And maybe the talks that Mr. Biden is having with Mr. Putin will reap some positive benefits. And I think there's a potential for breakthrough there.